That's right, it's a comprehensive updated Fury guide. I'm Killchain for your second monitor content for today. She's a long one, so strap in, but don't forget you have chapters marked out down below on the bottom of the video to help direct you where you need to go, or just sit back and relax and soak it all in while we do some world quests. Let's get it. First, taking a look at stats, some noticeable changes quite early on. You may have seen some old streams or VODs of mine where I was saying haste is just always edging out on everything, every threshold of item level that I was getting. Yeah, it just always seemed to be that haste was playing a far greater role than was given indication for. Now, as always, if you are running a bloodbath or any sort of build that runs cold steel hot blood, by all means, crit is going to edge its way higher and higher in the priority list. But as a general rule of thumb, and given that the crushing blow builds are dominating Fury Warrior play styles at the moment, haste mastery are the way to go. And keep in mind, if you're just sort of re-clarifying or running over some Wowhead guides, for example, the Season 1 Dragonflight Fury information in the quick cheat sheet does reflect the correct change with haste and mastery. However, the stats page shows the old 10.0.2 stat weights. They do show the old crit mastery one. So definitely haste and mastery, ignore the crit unless if you're running a cold steel hot blood build. And even then, on a case-by-case basis, always be simming your character over on raid bots. Now onto talent builds. Very similar to our previous guide, the Mythic Plus side of things has 3 major builds. Although they're marginally close enough to each other, the Crushing Blow build is simming out ahead, as well as just in tangible practice. It's much easier to maintain a very, very good DPS with a Crushing Blow build, and as such you can focus more on mechanics and things like that in a Mythic Plus environment. You will also have a Storm of Swords build where you forgo Raging Blow entirely, picking up Cold Steel Hot Blood, and you're basically going to be spamming Bloodthirst a lot. And then a middle of the pack kind of best of both worlds, so to speak, Bloodbath build where you're still picking up Unbridled Ferocity with Reckless Abandon, but then still pathing down into Cold Steel Hot Blood. So you're still going to be spamming a lot of Bloodthirst and Bloodbath, which is the empowered version of Bloodthirst, while using Raging Blow as a filler if and when needed, but still getting all the goodies that make the Crushing Blow build so strong in terms of AoE, prowess, and everything like that as well. So all 3 builds will have their input template down below in the description if you want to swing it in. Now, there's also a discussion to be had in regards to Thunderous Roar versus Spear of Bastion. Very valid criticism here. There are going to be some weeks and some scenarios with certain affixes and things like that where you're just not going to be able to stand in the spear for the full 6 seconds, and you definitely start losing out on its potential, where it would be actually worth it to run Thunderous Roar instead. Another couple of key changes without pulling out the 2 points from Spear and then Elysian Might into Thunderous Roar and Thunderous Words is there's really not too much emphasis on the tier set in general, which means that even if you're not running the 4 set, perfectly fine. You could even drop points again in Cruel Strikes, which is solely focused around crits and specifically execute critical damage, and that allows you to path into Shockwave for a very useful stun. Obviously in a Mythic Plus environment, it's less to do with the stunning part and more to do with the fact that it interrupts certain casts from dangerous mobs. So although we do want to make sure you aren't hitting diminishing returns by stunning things too much, keep in mind it doesn't matter if the duration is only like half a second for a stun. It's more about getting the actual interrupt off when it's crucially needed, especially on some packs where there's multiple mobs all casting shit at the same time, and a stun to interrupt them all there. Now, the personal caveat that I will add here as well is once you do have 4-piece for tier, I would probably consider dropping the Shockwave back into Cruel Strikes again, because there's obviously a higher value on execute and specifically execute damage again there. As for the raiding build, the Annihilator version, which is that whole Storm of Swords aspect of it where you're running Cold Steel Hot Blood instead, really doesn't compare to the Crushing Blow build or any sort of Raging Blow build in general. Definitely wouldn't recommend, spicing things up there. Just stick to the tried and true. Again, much easier of a rotation to maintain, allowing you to focus on raid mechanics and things like that. So now, within that Crushing Blow build, you'll obviously have a single target version, very useful for Teros and Kurog, sometimes maybe on Razageth, unless if you really have issues with ad management during the transition stages and everything like that. So yes, you'll have both a single target and a cleaving build. Now, really handy because 2 points is all you need to pull out to be able to get a very, very powerful cleaving build. So where we pull those 2 points out, though, will depend on, again, the 4-piece of tier set. If we're running 4-piece, you'd most likely take it out of Fresh Meat and Focus in Chaos, because you still want to be running the increasing damage to execute while running 4-piece because of the sudden death procs. But if you don't have 4-piece, then you don't also really need 2-piece, honestly. You'll be just running whatever eye level you can get your hands on, in which case, by all means, keep the Fresh Meat and keep the Focus in Chaos and drop instead Juggernaut and Massacre. You can still run Sudden Death to help fill the gaps in terms of rotation if you don't get lucky Raging Blow procs and things like that. So another thing to point out as well is, although Fresh Meat will help get your ball rolling, so to speak, in terms of initial enrage, when you are running the Cleave build, you'll also be swapping Dancing Blades into Titanic Rage, which allows the Odin's Fury proc from Avatar, which subsequently procs Enrage immediately as well. So in terms of getting that first initial Enrage up and running, nothing to worry about there, because Titanic Rage will cover you perfectly fine, even though you're losing Fresh Meat in that regard. So yeah, happy days. 4-piece, you do want to be dropping out of Focus in Chaos and Fresh Meat. If no 4-piece, then just pull it out of the execute increasing talents, being Juggernaut and Massacre. Consumables and enchants remain the same. Most notable reminders include the no-go on static empowerment, as you rarely be able to get stand still long enough to actually provide the proper benefit required for it. It's like literally the exact same concept as why we're having the discussion of dipping out of Spirit of Bastion, because once again, like, it's very typically not realistic to be able to stand in the Spirit of Bastion for the full 6 seconds, just like with static empowerment for the full 5 seconds to get the best benefit out of it. So same concept there, right? Food, obviously primary stat food, so for us is strength. Faded cookies for the solo food, otherwise stock up on feast. It is important to note that in Mythic Plus, once the timed run has started, you can't use faded cookies, as it forces you to try and loot a faded card that you typically just vendor. So in that regard, yeah, you literally cannot use faded cookies, unfortunately, because once you're in a Mythic Plus run, yeah, you're not allowed to loot items, unfortunately, or open anything that puts something in your bags that, like, it completely loot locks you out until you've done the run, which is very unfortunate. Weapon enchantments. Frozen Devotion remains the best for single target, with Sophic Devotion for AoE scenarios. Now, it's really unrealistic to expect Fury Warriors to maintain 4 two-handers for perfect optimization in all scenarios. And it's also very expensive, because these bad boys are still running 60 to 100k a pop just for the maxed out 3-star version of the enchantments. My recommendation, just go for Sophic. Even if you go as low as Sophic Writ instead of Sophic Devotion, still the same concept. It's a chance on hit primary stat increase, essentially. But Sophic Writ will obviously be a bit cheaper, as it doesn't give you as much strength. Now, yeah, Sophic Devotion in single target scenarios, it's marginally worse, but in all the AoE scenarios, so every single Mythic Plus dungeon ever, as well as like 60 to 80% of the raid environments, you're still going to get decent benefit out of Sophic Devotion. That would be my recommendation. Just skip out on Frozen Devotion entirely. And yeah, you just go for Sophic. Now, the actual enchantments on all the gear, same concept, right? It's literally identical. So Cloak has Avoidance, Bracer with Avoidance, Chest with Waken Stats, Legs with the Fierce Armor Kit, Boots with Watcher's Loam, Rings swapping based on whatever Sims highest in terms of your secondary stat, but in 99% of scenarios it's going to be Haste again. To give you a bit of an anecdote, right, like for my item level 330, 333-ish when I started first hitting level 70, right the way through, all the way up to I'm now almost 400 eye level. At every step of the way, it's told me Haste is my best, and I've been getting a lot of Haste gear, and it's my highest stat buffer. So very odd, but keep that in mind. As for gems, you typically always want to get the Mastery and Haste gems. The 2-stat gems give you more bang for your buck than the 1-stat gems, so definitely opt for those. And you want to make sure you're getting the Mastery high versus the Haste high. So Mastery high, Haste low. The reason being is because the Haste high ones are considered Earth gems, and that will make your Elemental Lariat proc the wrong stat that you don't want. Whereas Mastery high, Haste low, that is considered an air gem, which means that the Elemental Lariat will proc Haste, which is what you want. So although it seems a bit counterintuitive, because you want the gems to give you more Haste than Mastery, especially if Haste is obviously simming higher for you, Don't fall for that trap. Make sure you get the mastery high ones, as they will make sure you only ever have air gems in your sockets, which means that your elemental lariat will always proc haste for you. So that's what you want. So now let's talk gearing. I want to cover some key pieces of gear to look out for and a general overview of how the path to best in slot will look. First and foremost, Fury's tier bonuses really aren't that great. In terms of value, even with a 4-piece, it won't be uncommon that certain eye level upgrades will just flat out outperform the fact that you're losing or breaking up your 4-piece bonus. The bulk of the most impactful upgrades are going to solely come from weapons and trinkets as always, but rings do play a huge source of secondary stats here, so don't neglect them, and they're actually quite scarce this season. It's potentially even look at getting a jewel crafter and dropping a spark on getting them to craft you a ring, because that way with the ring you can get your missive, make sure you get the perfect stats with haste and mastery, and you'll be able to upgrade that with primal infusions and ultimately concentrated primal infusions from your mythic plus 16s or mythic rating when you eventually get there. As for dungeons, Algathar Academy is going to be your best friend. So you have a great weapon from there, the Algathar Hedge Cleaver. It's one of the only sources of a ring, not the best stats, but still, especially if you get a gem socket on it, it's pretty handy. And our best in slot trinket, the puzzle box. So the puzzle box does have a cast time on it, so if and when you get one, play around with it a bit, get comfortable with it. You obviously get a large mastery buff, like a fucking massive mastery buff. So use it before you pop all your big cooldowns and get used to pre-casting it for bosses in raids, for example, as before the tank pulls aggro, right? So as the countdown hits 3 or 2 or however long the cast is, pre-cast it so you can charge in, ready to go. Manic Grief Torch is another high-performing trinket that you want to grab from Broodkeeper when you can. Storm Eater's Boon obviously doesn't have as much output, but it allows us to avoid displacement abilities, so very handy on a fair number of fights across this season. Dathia has her little suck-in with the whirlwind thing. The Algathar mini-boss has the blowback. Senarth has the web pulls, and then in second phase has the knockback. Razageth has a knockback. You have Inhale from the worm in Shadowmoon Burial Ground, for example. Yeah, many different scenarios across both rating and Mythic Plus where being able to avoid the displacement abilities could mean the difference between timing a key or killing a boss, etc. Whispering Incarnate Icon, this, or Idol, I'm not sure which one it is, but yeah, the Whispering Incarnate one. This one, very solid option, definitely well worth having one of them, and that might end up being one of our best in slot for single target, I believe. Performs very similar, or functions very similar, sorry, to Stone Legion Heraldry, I believe it was called, from back in Shadowlands. The more people that have the same trinket, you get more value out of it, but it does allow it to swap based on your role. So your secondary stats you get based on whether you're a tank, DPS, or healer. So that's very handy there. The last trinket, Windscar Whetstone, that I want to cover is just a typical hit the button, do big damage. It's, yeah, pretty straightforward. But scales very well, so Court of Stars is where that one drops. Keep an eye on that one as well. Weapons, you're mainly ultimately going to focus on Razageth's Incarnate Skysplitter. That's like the dream. But I already mentioned the Hedge Cleaver from Algathar Academy. Then you also have Leyline Tracer, a pole arm from Azure Vault. And they have really good stats. It's haste mastery there. Otherwise, we are quite fortunate. We do have, again, perfect stats, haste and mastery, a 2-hand mace from Primal Council. And the good thing about this is it's obviously the second or third boss for most people in the guild. And eventually it means you're going to be able to outgear it even on Mythic. If you're a typical just normal AOTC guild or something like that, being able to get Mythic Primal Council down is sort of a realistic end goal at some point to be able to get some extra juicy gear, which means you'll get a nice 2-handed mace that you can double up on or at least get one of with really good stats there. Mythic Vault options. So they now scale up to key 20 for a 421 piece of gear from the Mythic Vault. So very, very high equivalent Mythic rating gear for 421. It's going to be absolutely bonkers. If you're able to do anything higher than an 11 key, you'll start noticing that the vault item level will be higher than even heroic rating. So anything above a 11 key is basically to your benefit, and it should be pretty realistic. If you're clearing heroic, then there's no reason you can't do 15s or maybe even 16, 17, somewhere in that range. You'll definitely be able to outstrip the 402 provided by heroic rating for that vault, and then use the Mythic Vault to get all the juicy gear. Now, keep in mind, Mythic Vault options also include tier items. I have a guildie that got, I believe, 418 legs already for a tier piece. So very, very handy. Definitely keep an eye out on your tier items from the Mythic Vault. That'll make your life a lot easier as you're able to definitely push it a lot higher item level. Last little caveat for the gearing section is the embellishments. We get 2 to play with. Elemental Lariat, as you would have just seen on the screen earlier. 100% must have, in fact 90% of specs in the game want an Elemental Lariat. However, you have 1 embellishment left to play with. Your options, and most written guides will agree here, you'll have the Preparation Legs or the Wrist Guards of Companionship for raiding. So Mythic Plus, yeah, the legs for the haste buff. Every new mob pack you hit, you'll get a nice bit of haste. And then the Wrist Guards for invading environment. However, my hot take here, I would actually forgo the Preparation Legs entirely. As you start getting to higher keys, the mob packs are lasting a lot, like significantly longer that the uptime in terms of like ratio of that 10 seconds window of having more haste versus how long each mob pack actually just naturally lasts. It's like over a minute half the time, especially on fortified weeks. I pretty much will have my 1.5 minute cooldowns up for almost every mob pool, pack pool that we do. And yeah, it just loses value. 10 seconds out of a total 90 seconds isn't a good ratio to work with. Whereas the versatility from the Wrist Guards of Companionship, 100% uptime, you'll always have the other allies within your range. Yeah, that's what would be my go-to for sure. I would forgo the Preparation Legs. Rotation is last but not least, as you've got your gear, embellishments, talents, gems, everything's all set, but how do we do the big damn? So let's run over a really easy mode layman's version first. Simply put, spamming Raging Blow, which will sometimes be Crushing Blow when it's empowered with Reckless Abandon. You dump your rage on Rampage, and that in turn gives you more Crushing Blows. Simples. If there's nothing else to hit, you'll be hitting Execute if it's available through either Sudden Death or just the Execute phase. Otherwise, Bloodthirst will be the final filler that you can use. Keep in mind, you will be using Bloodthirst defensively with like Enrage Regen up, etc. to make sure you help your healers out and that kind of thing if you need to. Otherwise, you can use Enrage Regen as just a purely defensive option without changing your rotation, just through having a 20% damage reduction. So alternatives there, but in terms of actual typical rotation, spam the shit out of Raging Blow and Rampage. Cool. 2-button spam, happy days. Now, however, there's obviously far more nuance to it than perhaps some people give credit for, calling you like flavor of the month 2-button spec and hurting your feelings a lot. To the inner workings, first of all, if you're running the pure single target build, for example on Teros, open with the Bloodthirst. It guarantees your enrage from the fresh meat talent, and you want to use that before you blow all your big cooldowns, etc. If you blew your Spear, Avatar, Odin's Fury, proc, Recklessness, etc., all that stuff before you're enraged because you have not yet hit your first Rampage as a part of the opener, that's obviously not smart, right? Outside of that though, if you're running the Titanic Rage talent from the Cleave version of the raid build, then opening with Avatar subsequently auto procs Odin's Fury, which subsequently auto enrages you. So happy days, you don't need to open with Bloodthirst in that case. Because each cast of Rampage gives you 2 procs of Crushing Blow, the empowered version of Raging Blow, consuming them takes all precedent over anything else while enraged. It doesn't matter if you have Rampage ready, doesn't matter if you're going to overcap Rage. Crushing Blows while while enraging, 100%, that's your bee's knees. Unless, of course, you aren't enraged or about to fall off, like within the global cooldown. Then by all means, maintain Rampage. That subsequently is going to give you fresh 2 new Crushing Blows to work with, and it re-enrages you happy days from there. Outside of that, if your 2 Crushing Blows are used and you only have regular Raging Blow, then Rampage and Execute are your priority over regular Raging Blow there. And again, if you happen to Rampage, fresh Enrage timer, fresh 2 Crushing Blows to work with. Awesome. Bloodthirst strictly only used defensively with Enrage Regen, unless if you absolutely have nothing else to do. It's not common, but sometimes you can get bad luck with Raging Blow resets. You can't Rampage yet, etc. Then Bloodthirst will be a filler. Whirlwind will be weaved in every 4 abilities due to Meat Cleaver, so the Meat Cleaver Weavy. Whirlwind every 4 abilities, then just continue with your single target rotation there. Now get your asses out there and go do some big damn.